I'm delighted to introduce our guest speaker this morning, Mr. Nick MacDonald. He is completing his first year of teaching here, and he's coming back next year. Mr. MacDonald was a big reason for our success this year in football. He's an offensive and defensive line coach, and he also played football at Holy Cross. But beyond that, he's also an historian and a teacher and sort of a Renaissance man, and I've enjoyed getting to know him. He had a life-transforming trip this year, first trip abroad in Italy with Mr. Curry and Mr. Chung. And so I'm delighted to introduce him, and here he is, Mr. Nick MacDonald.
Good morning. Today's talk is about a rapidly growing problem that is sweeping the nation. It is also time for me to formally tell my story and how it relates to this problem. I apologize ahead of time for the amount of I and me that is in this speech. I studied history in college and therefore wasn't given much chance to pursue first-person writing. It's actually rather fun. For most of my adult life, I've been a fairly confident individual. In college, I was a 265-pound defensive lineman. And to be frank, there wasn't an individual that I encountered that scared me. No one was bigger, more athletic, or badder than me. Or so I thought in my mind. So actually, let's clear the air. I wasn't just confident, I was downright cocky. But now my football playing days are over, and many things have changed, especially my size. I've also grown out of my cocky phase, pursuing a more realistic or balanced view of the world. Although I am now somewhat of a realist, I've held on to that confidence because for me, as well as many other individuals out there, gaining confidence was quite a struggle. I've lived my entire life having to answer certain questions and comments about myself, specifically the way I talk. This happened quite often in my first few months of working here at Taft. Although usually asked in a conscientious way, I've always wondered why. Why these questions? Because they always seem to be the same. Questions such as, what happened to your voice? Do you have a sore throat? What's wrong with your voice? So when feeling particularly antisocial, I usually mumble something along the lines of, yes, indeed, I do have a sore throat. Or I sometimes simply say, no, this is just the way I talk. I share this with you because these comments and questions were not always asked in a polite tone or with an inquisitive look. Instead, commentary about my voice made my life a living hell up until 9th grade. For most of the time I went to school, I was a victim of multiple bullies. So what exactly is bullying anyways? Bullying is the unwanted, aggressive behavior among school-aged children that involves a real or perceived power imbalance. The behavior is repeated or has the potential of being repeated over time. Bullying includes such actions such as making threats, spreading rumors, attacking someone physically or verbally, and excluding someone from a group on purpose. Cyberbullying is the same definition, except via an electronic medium. Examples of cyberbullying include, but are certainly not limited to, text messages, emails, these social networking sites like Facebook and Twitter, posting embarrassing pictures or videos, creating websites, and also creating fake profiles on these sites. Who can be bullied? Bullies only prey on the weak, correct? Absolutely not. Anyone, anywhere can be at risk of being bullied. It's all a matter of circumstance. Also, depending on the locale, some groups have been found to be at an increased risk of being bullied. These being those individuals that identify as lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, and also those that are disabled in some way. Is bullying a problem here at Taft? Well, that depends on whom you ask. Compared to other schools, some would answer that no. There is an inherent problem, that is, an extreme number of bullying cases that we as a community deal with. On the other hand, I, for one, firmly believe that one case constitutes a problem. In researching this topic, I consulted a few of our school counselors we have here at Taft. Most of the questions I posed to them were of a variety asking what types of bullying situations do we have at Taft? Or what are the causes and effects of these bullying cases? Most of the bullying cases in this school have dealt with social problems. And thankfully, many have only been of the harassing nature, not delving too much into physical confrontation. A boarding school creates the perfect scenario for bullying, It's a very closed environment. Many people of different social backgrounds. Competition among students in sports, clubs, the classroom, and even popularity. Most of Taft's cases have dealt with these power struggles or, and I quote, jockeying for popularity, and sometimes even jockeying for intelligence in the classroom. A major concern of the counselors considers the amount of bullying that may go on unnoticed or not brought to the attention of an adult. The effects of bullying. There are many harrowing effects. Constant berating from peers can have a terrible result on mental health. It has also led to increased substance abuse from those that are bullied. As just like most drug users, reality is not a place they want to be. And tragically enough, it can even lead to suicide. One of the more recent bullying stories includes that of students at Rutgers University who had to deal with a particularly nasty case of a hate crime coupled with cyberbullying. Former Rutgers student Darren Ravi found it necessary to tape his roommate, Tyler Clementi, as the latter engaged in a consensual sexual encounter with another man in the pair's dorm room. The taping was unbeknownst to Clementi. The shame, which none of us will ever fully know, tormented Clementi for 3 days, after which he decided to end his life by jumping off the George Washington Bridge in New York. Ravi has been convicted of all 15 charges against him, including, but not limited to, invasion of privacy and bias intimidation, which is considered a hate crime. He will be sentenced May 21st and is looking at roughly 10 years of jail time. Personally, I hope he serves every one of those 10 years. This situation begs many questions of Ravi, least of which is why. Another case involves that of Phoebe Prince, who in 2009 came to America from her native Ireland. She briefly dated, ironically, the star football player at South Hadley High School in Massachusetts when her tormenting began. Because she dated the aforementioned popular student, an action that for some reason was deemed too much for some to handle, 7 girls launched a tirade of mental, physical, and emotional assaults on Phoebe. Prosecutors later gave these young ladies the moniker, the Mean Girls, a name that I have heard float around this school in reference to some groups. Some of the egregious acts committed against Phoebe include consistently knocking the books out of her hands, pushing and shoving, throwing objects at her, threatening her via text message, and also calling and referring to her, and I quote, as Irish slut and whore on the social networking sites Facebook and Twitter. Later, her parents and prosecutors found out that most of the bullying occurred on school grounds, with some instances, sadly enough, being witnessed by the faculty, who failed to respond adequately. She hung herself on January 14, 2010, after being hit with a can on her walk home from school. Even after her suicide, one of her tormentors, again via a social networking site, put up a status that read, and I quote, accomplished. 9 students have been arrested in connection with these crimes, and so far 6 have been charged. Now, although these 2 cases are not indicative of the outcome of every bullying case, it is safe to say that most people that have experienced bullying are traumatically affected in some way. As I mentioned earlier, I was bullied from the time I was in elementary school up until my freshman year of high school. I can identify with the at-risk group I mentioned earlier, filing under those that are disabled in some way. From what I've gathered, the source of pleasure for my bullies was one category, my voice. My voice has been described in many ways, most usually termed as raspy or gravelly. I've been called anything from Godfather to Frogman, and many more insulting names that are too inappropriate for this morning meeting. One of the more tumultuous effects that bullying has had on me was when my peers would mock my voice in my presence. Frankly, no one, including the students and faculty members in this audience, has done an adequate job of reproducing my voice. It's pretty original. And to be honest, I don't find these reproductions very funny, not in the least. But some do, and my bullies certainly did. I had many of these bullies, with one particular nemesis who will stay unnamed. Such was the psychological damage that I felt for years. I suffered greatly in school. I remember feeling many emotions. terror, loneliness, pain, with anger and sadness prevailing. I was actually convinced that there was something wrong with me, that in fact, I was different and deserved to be made fun of. I cried nightly throughout my formative years. There were time periods when I was terrified to speak in class. When a teacher asked me to read a passage from a book, I just wouldn't, much to the chagrin of my parents, who had to hear of my plummeting grades from my teachers. And I mentioned how big I was earlier, and also my confidence. Well, at that time in my life, I was neither big, nor did I have a surplus of swagger. As I grew into middle school, I thought that maybe I had had enough. So I tried to fight my way out of these situations. I was a fairly tall child, I've always been tall, but I was remarkably thin, and I wasn't very successful in my physical confrontations. So picking that option wasn't a smart choice, as I not only kept being bullied, but I also got my butt kicked in the process. So I now realize I didn't have the inner confidence to overcome what tormented me. Most agree that there are 3 ways to deal with a bully. You can tell an adult. If you're lucky, an older peer or an older friend will help you out with this bully, or you deal with it yourself. So, could I be blamed? I didn't have this guardian angel older friend to help me out. And tell an adult? Telling wasn't in my vocabulary when I was younger, mostly because I was terrified of the consequences. So my bullying persisted until 9th grade, when one of the best things in my life happened. Now, to preface this, I must say that I get lost quite often. Not as often as, say, Mr. Corey, who gets lost walking from his apartment to his classroom. So, when halfway through my freshman year I got lost in the basement of Lackawanna High School, my life completely changed. I heard this banging and clanking and loud music coming from a random room. So my curiosity was piqued and I strolled in. Now this may sound like a cliche rendition of a jock's life, but I just stumbled on the weight room. After being taken in by a few football players and introduced to weights for the first time, 2 things happened. I became addicted to the idea of filling in for my lack of voice with lifting weights and sports. And also, I gained a tiny, tiny spark of confidence. So the next day, I encountered my particularly terrible nemesis in front of a large contingent of the school. And let's just say, I was never bullied again. I relay this story for many reasons. The largest being that I hope that all those out there that are victims of a bully don't deal with their situations through physical confrontation. A wise member of this faculty, and a personal mentor of mine, contends that out of the 3 options for dealing with a bully that I mentioned above, the only true way is to do it by yourself. It doesn't necessarily mean getting into a fight. Doing it yourself means exhausting all other options and convincing yourself that indeed there is nothing wrong with you. In actuality, you are a unique, wonderful individual. I've often wondered, what was so wrong with my voice? Why did it irk these tormentors so much? So with these questions, I went back and looked again at how people asked me about my voice. And then at what caused me to talk the way I do. One question that I'm commonly asked, that is always sort of ironic, is, did you lose your voice? And now when feeling particularly down or sarcastic or even fiery, I respond, no, it was taken from me. And here's why. When I was roughly 8 years old, my parents found a strange mark in my body. Taking me to the pediatric doctor, I was diagnosed with a thyroglossal duct cyst. Now, although that sounds like a terrifying diagnosis, from what I've gathered, it's a rather rare occurrence, yet rather easy to be treated. That long, complex name, thyroglossal duct cyst, simply denotes that I had a cyst on the front of my neck. In my mother's words, it looked like a purple tumor sticking out of your throat. Allegedly, the cyst wasn't a danger, but needed to be eventually removed. After a few more months of growing and coincidentally getting sick, my parents decided to have the operation to remove the cyst 2 weeks after my first birthday, on Valentine's Day, 1989. They made one simple mistake. They were referred to and chose a general surgeon, as opposed to an ear, nose, and throat specialist, or even a pediatric surgeon. I went into surgery early in the morning. The last thing the doctor told my mother was, and I quote, "Not to worry, this is common. We'll be in and out. The surgery is supposed to take roughly 6 hours, and then I can go home." Through the course of many mistakes, I was in the hospital for over a month, until March 23rd. All of my problems arose from the first doctor, the surgeon who signed on to do the operation. Upon finishing the surgery, the doctor pulled out the breathing tube that was down my neck. Common practice to do when you're finished with the surgery. He didn't realize that during the operation, he completely botched it, severing my trachea, or as most know it, the windpipe. Immediately, my body, especially my face and neck, started to swell as air was sucked in between the folds of my skin, a condition I've been told is called subcutaneous emphysema. Upon realizing this, the doctor, in his infinite wisdom, decided to, and I quote, shove the breathing tube back down my neck to stabilize my breathing. Little did he know that his actions would further destroy my vocal producing capabilities. Due to the damage and inexperience of the staff, I was rushed to a local children's hospital, tube still rammed down my throat. Upon arriving at the hospital, my lungs collapsed. I was immediately rushed into emergency surgery to stay alive. After this surgery was successful, I was kept intubated for 2 weeks. The doctors then had to remove the tube from my mouth to help my throat heal. I still wasn't able to breathe on my own, so I was given another operation, this one called the tracheotomy. This is when there was a slit cut into the lower part of the neck, right below the voice box, where another small tube is placed to help breathing. As a 1-year-old infant, I was put on high doses of painkillers and also sedated throughout the recovery process, so as to not pull the tube from my throat. Eventually, I was weaned off the medication and life support in an effort to get me ready for yet another surgery. It seems that my first doctor had not only botched the operation, but didn't actually remove the cyst. The new team of doctors was able to successfully remove the cyst, and I recovered in time. Throughout this ordeal, I was left with a destroyed voice box. Contrary to common belief, in my research I found out that humans don't actually have vocal cords. We have what's instead called a vocal folds. Mine are deformed, scarred, and battered in a way that leaves them looking nothing like a normal set. With that matter at lump, I was also given this wonderful voice of mine. Sadly enough, there are many stories out there like Tyler's, Phoebe's, and mine. After looking through the details of their stories and that of my own, I can't find one characteristic that should be troubling enough to others that they needed to belittle and terrorize us. Simply put, I don't understand it. Specialists in clinical settings say that bullies are bullies because of inadequacies in their own life. Whatever the reasoning may be, there's no excuses for the outcomes that inherently come with bullying. I don't understand why it's cool to be mean and not nice. So lately I've grown to be a more humble individual, although I am still very confident. I've learned that I have something to offer. I'm not worthless, and there's nothing wrong with me. And I hope any victims out there can one day realize this also. If anyone at all feels as if they have been bullied, I implore you to speak to someone. Our counselors here at Taft do a wonderful job. And like most of the faculty, myself included, would be more than willing to help you out. So, from my 2 cyst removal surgeries, the collapsed lung, and the tracheotomy, I bear 3 distinct scars. 3 scars I'm extremely proud of. And although I can't scream and yell like most of you out there, if I was ever prompted with the opportunity to get a new voice, I would quickly deny the offer. I'm fine with being me. Thank you very much.